Okay. Thank you very much indeed, and welcome to the Transformation and Improvement Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Before we start, I need to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Please also note that all remote participants are muted at the outset of the meeting and are only able to speak at the invitation of the chair. Please raise your virtual hand if you wish to speak, and then only unmute when the chair invites you to make a contribution. As chair, I may ask that you are muted if you do not participate in this. Thank you. Item number 1 is apologies for absence. Dan Thomas is unable to attend, and so he's being substituted by Rob Gittins. And Robert Tyndall is unable to attend, and his substitute is not able to attend. Before we move on to item 2, I would just like to welcome Cabinet. With the leader, the deputy leader, and I think just about every cabinet member and deputy portfolio holder are here in the audience if we wish to ask them any questions. So thank you very much for coming. Item number 2, disclosable pecuniary interests. Do you have any? No. Okay. Item number 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I have a proposer, please? Joyce. Any seconding? All those in favour? I think that's unanimous. Thank you. Public questions, there are none. Member questions, there are none. Item number 6 is the financial monitoring for period 8, 24-25. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask James, a combination of actually James, Ben and Willem, to speak by way of introducing the paper. So if you'd like to go first, James.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this is the period 8 financial monitoring position. That is the position to the end of November. So this report was produced over the period December and into the early part of January, so it could be with us today for consideration. The period 7 was the only report that has not been published through each of the months of the financial year. That's because that fell just to it was too late to be considered for the cabinet in December. So the period 8 position picks up updates from period 6, which was the quarter 2, which was the last one that went to cabinet, and the period 7, which is saying was not generally published to a committee. As at period 8, the overspend has deteriorated slightly, so it's showing a £37.3 million over budget. There's a combination of reasons for this, and the detailed information is shown within the appendix. As usually done for each of these monitoring reports, we produce a summary position whereby we look at a favourable and adverse scenarios. That's shown in section paragraph 2.3. The favourable scenario is now looking at 32.3 million and the adverse at 60.21, with the central assessment being 37.31. The value of the favourable and the adverse figures are moving closer to that central position, which is what you'd expect as you work through the financial year. As less years are left as less months are left in the financial year, there is less time for something to go right or to go wrong compared to that central scenario. But nevertheless, there's a table in the report that demonstrates where those areas of significant risk are, and they're coded, rag rated to red, amber and green, and can be considered by the committee. In relation to their individual position, at 7.2 there is a table 3, which gives a breakdown of where the overspend sits. You'll notice that compared to previous reports, there is no now bottom line adjustment. There's been in the last couple of periods. There was an adjustment made for figures that had not yet been allocated within individual service areas or directorates. Those have all now been allocated into the directorate areas. So we have a final figure as to what that projection looks like. The general fund balance, which is shown in section 8, brought forward at just over £8 million, and then there was a £30.6 million allocation which was budgeted for to go into reserves in the year. That means that the 37.3 overspend as it stands at the moment would leave us with about £1.5 million in reserves. That is a difficult situation. It's significantly below what we would be expecting to see, and is below what was there at period 6 and period 7. So we're working hard to ensure that trend downwards is reversed, and we move it back to at least the sorts of figures that we were talking about at period 6 and period 7. The first appendix shows the breakdown of the areas, individual areas within the budget where we have variances, and there is some narrative there provided as to how things have moved from period 7 to period 8, period 7 being quite similar to period 6, so hopefully that will be helpful. You'll see the biggest change was within growth and infrastructure, where a figure of just under 1.2 million has moved in as an additional cost. This basically relating to a review of the MRP and the cost of borrowing, and that figure then being allocated into growth and growth and infrastructure for expenditure incurred in the previous year, but which the full cost of borrowing hadn't been adequately shown within the projections. Most of the other variances are quite minor in terms of the changes between period 7 and period 8. Nevertheless, there are still some significant variances overall, which comes down to either non-delivery of savings or for pressures within particular service areas, and those are provided. Appendix 2 has been added in this time, and it's worth just having a brief look at Appendix 2. This is taken from the dashboard, which shows all of the savings that need to be delivered in the financial year. So everything in total, including the savings from previous years, come to £90 million. The reason for inclusion of this is because it includes a purple tile and a white tile that turns to black in the later months, which is the impact of non-delivery of savings on next year. So regardless of where we can contain the overspend in the current financial year within the available resources, there's nevertheless a carry forward of any unachieved savings into next year. They're not achieved, or if they're achieved by a one-off, it doesn't mean that they go away, so they stay within the budget. As at the end of September, the white tile on the right-hand side in Appendix 2, as at the end of September, that was showing that there was £43 million problem in 25-26 as a result. In October, that reduced to 41 million, and in November, that reduced to 37.7. So we're still talking about significant figures and significant impact on the budget for next year. Nevertheless, what we are seeing is a trend that those figures are slowly reducing, and there is still another couple of months left in this year to reduce those figures down still further, which just means that the impact on next year is reduced. Below that then is a breakdown of all of the individual savings, showing the delivery in year, those that are rated amber, those that are rated red, still plans required to deliver that in year, and then again that purple column showing what's been delivered in the full year for next year, 25-26. That's the summary of the report, but I'm just taking questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any questions of anybody at this fund?
Why aren't we achieving the savings that we're setting out to achieve? If we were a private company or a PLC, things heads would roll. I mean, why aren't we actually achieving what we intend to achieve? Why is it all slipping?
I can start if that's helpful, Chair. So there's a combination of reasons. One example is if I talk about the staffing savings and staffing reductions. So of the £90 million in total, 27 million related to staffing. Of that, there's around about £9 million which is delivered, and there's £18 million still to be delivered in relation to that. Now, of that 18 million to be delivered, we're reasonably confident, we're working through the figures at the moment, reasonably confident that there's probably another 4 or 5 million, which actually just not shown in the figures yet. So if you take that as an example, we've run through a voluntary redundancy programme, we've reviewed all of the vacancies, we have looked at capitalisation of staff, we've looked at resizing and restructures as part of that. Now, a number of the voluntary redundancies, to take that as one example, have been taken. Some of those have gone, people have already gone. Some of those are people that were going before the end of the financial year. Some of those voluntary redundancies are happening next year. So in that situation, in that scenario, we clearly have delivered the saving, but we've also not delivered the saving because we haven't delivered it yet. So the plans are in place, just the decision was taken, that individual post can be deleted, but it can't be deleted until maybe June or September next year. So there's all those sorts of examples that we need to work through. In some cases, there have been savings that have not been delivered quickly enough, and that's been as a result of the market, the environment we're working to, or because individual areas have had to focus on 2 or 3 different things and have not given it the priority that I would argue it needed. In other areas, savings have been delivered, and in some cases they've been in advance. So it's a complicated picture across the board. It was, let's not forget, the biggest savings target really this authority's ever had, and it was on the back of the previous year, 51.4 million pounds, of which 80% of those savings have been delivered. So on top of the savings that were required for 24-25, we also had that rump of about 20 million pounds for the savings from the previous year, which couldn't be delivered. And if they weren't able to be delivered in 4-5, that added an extra dimension to the problems in 5-6. There has been some difficulty in generating more of the income savings that are required, but part of that, actually, the overall level of savings that we delivered around income has been very positive. There's only about £4 million outstanding on that, and there are plans in place to deliver that £4 million for next year. So a lot of it is around the timing, but in some cases there have been some specific difficulties. I think probably an area that I would highlight as difficult in delivering the savings would be around property rationalisation. That has been quite difficult to actually reduce our overall footprint, partly because aside from moving from Shirehall to Guildhall, we don't have a lot of administrative buildings left that we can save money on now. So we're into the sort of operational buildings, and that can be all sorts of things from, libraries, museums, depots, leisure centres. All of these are running costs that we have in terms of property. It's a lot more difficult to rationalise libraries and swimming pools, for example, than it is to rationalise perhaps staff accommodation. But I'll stop at that point. It's quite
that's helpful. Thank you.
So we have actually got Billy Webster and online. Here, I believe your title is transformation. Yeah. Have you got anything specifically you'd like to add? Because I presume that you've been very heavily involved in this.
Yes. The majority of the significant projects are focused on the savings kind of agenda, as well as enabling savings. So digitalisation, for example, to allow us to reduce the time spent or the number of people kind of administering either customers or systems and processes. So we prioritised all of our resourcing in the transformation team around delivering the savings, and as James says, I think there have been some quite significant and substantial gains, whilst there are areas that we need to refocus and reprioritise for next year so that we optimise the savings that we can. It's a big challenge, but we're all working hard to achieve it.
So can I just follow on from what you just said? Obviously, when you first start out, you have a bit of a hiatus before you start making some real progress. Do you envisage that the savings will be achieved more quickly now you've got everything in place?
The biggest driver for us has been to make sure that when we set, as a council, the financial strategy, that we then work collectively with services to have a plan to deliver those. So obviously we put together those plans, and then that's what we focus our attention on. And the other bit is about raising awareness, so that transparency around reporting regularly and escalating where issues happen. So we do all of that. We've introduced what I'd consider to be, a best practice project governance around transformation and savings delivery. And you do see delivery happening very quickly in the new year for those projects that are ready to go, and those that have longer lead times obviously need some pre-work done. So I think we're doing everything we can, and I think that shows in the figures. So you look at the last 2 years of delivery, that the way in which we've managed savings delivery has been through the change board, or ERB, and I think we've been very successful, more successful than in the years previous. So I think we're doing things right. I think it's then making sure we prioritise on the priorities, and we make sure we then deliver those priorities as quickly as possible to get the full year effect, because obviously the quicker we can do that at the start of the year, the longer we have to reap the rewards of the and benefits.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any more questions? William, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Chair. The only thing I would say is obviously these have been discussed at length at the collaborative budget meetings.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of inquiries may well have been undertaken at that stage. It's very much a moving feast. And I'll await, what period 9 and 10 come out with. Temporary accommodation is one that I'd be glad to see the overspend coming down, but I know there's been issues with planning over that, so to bring things in-house. So let's watch this space. I think if we can keep bringing these reports to the collaborative budget meetings as we move forward, so all group leaders have up-to-date information as soon as possible, it'll be very effective.
And we actually had a meeting this morning, and we've been meeting every week. So you're right, the group leaders and the deputies have had every opportunity to come with us on the journey. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd have said success is delivering the budget. The budget for this year, and it's this year we're talking about, has not been delivered. The budget was put together by the council 12 months ago. That was the budget that the council were told in February, 12 months ago, and in the January before that, we're told this is the budget that was going to be delivered, and we were going to end this year with a substantial general reserve pot. The prediction is in period 8, we're going to finish this year with £1.5 million. And one has to ask why. If we look at page 1 of this, there's £1 million there, additional borrowing costs associated with capital investment. Wasn't that already built into the budget? I don't know, but by the look of it, it wasn't. Then if one goes over the page and goes to page 3 or 1, whichever, which has got the coloured chart on, if one looks at that between the three, central, advanced, and those there, you see there's the amounts there, which is shown as being assumes all projected capital receipts are secured by the 31st of March. Okay, until a contract is signed, a contract isn't signed. But if one looks at it, and then there's significant additional receipts from alternative approaches are no longer anticipated in the year. Why is that then? But if one then goes on further on, you'll see, everybody will see that the place budget, for example, and there's a lot of emphasis based on the people budget. But if you look at the place budget and then go into this period 8, one can see that there is £14 million of savings not delivered. Why?
Can you just tell everyone what page you're on? What you
Page 10.
Page 10. Okay.
Place total 13.026 million at the end of period 7. I think period 8 it's 14.35 million pounds is according to that forecast variance. And up above it, there are some there, 2.5 million corporate MTFS savings, not yet realised. £2 million shortfall on waste PFI contract, renegotiation based on delayed implementation. £1.7 million shortfall on green waste charges due to October implementation. And it goes on. This is nothing to do with the social care. This is place budget, £14 million, which was failed to be delivered, which we were assured as a councillor would be delivered this current financial year. We are asked now to look at later on today, looking at the draft financial strategy for next year. How satisfied can we be that the budget for next year will be delivered when it hasn't been for the last 2, 3, 4 years, when it's been overspent every year? At the end of last year, the budget, the reserves dropped to raised from £7 million to £8 million. This year, the reserves are going down to 1.5, which is a level no council of this size should ever have reserves of that sort of low value. It is not safe. It's true. When you have an £850 million budget and you've got 1.5 in general reserves, there are other reserves which could be tapped into. Is that the way to run a council? No, in my mind, it isn't. I'd like to hear comments of why the different portfolio holders haven't delivered the budget that they said they assured the council February last year they would deliver. And I'm only talking about this year. The collaborative budget people, councillors are looking for next year. And we're not looking at that in this one. We're looking at period 8, which is deteriorating from period 7, which was better than period 6, I think. But we should be getting better, not deteriorating. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a couple of people. Can I ask Ian, please, and Leslie to come up to the table? And I'll just ask Willem to start answering Roger's question. I think it'd be interesting to speak about the waste.
If I could actually give perhaps an overview of the situation, perhaps for people in the room and people who may be listening online. I've been on this council now since 2009, and I have not yet seen a year when we've actually had a budget that has come in on track completely. Because what you have to remember, we are an organisation with a turnover of £750 million. And we were actually asked to find the 90 million this year, which was the carry forward and the amounts of this current year's proposed savings. Now, where Councillor Evans actually says we will only have reserves of £1.5 million at the end of this year, if I'm correct, James, when we were at this situation last year, I think the reserves were predicted to be about 2.3 million, if not 2.5 million, until the final settlement came in and until we actually got the final end of year totals that actually came through. Now, any organisation trying to do the list of what we're doing there is going to have slippage. And what I would say is, thank God we did put that money into reserves. And I put that money into reserves every year for the last 4 years, because I know how this business runs. And I know there will be slippage. And I know in the open market, you can't get everything done straight away. You can't get in-house temporary accommodation at the click of a hand. We can't actually decide how much to put in a budget for ash dieback around the county and actually spend the money to keep people safe. And I think a lot of the criticism is just warmongering or scaremongering. But actually, it's not easy. It is difficult circumstances. but history is proving true that what we've done in the past has been right. And we will bring in the budget this year in a balanced way, using the reserves as we have done every year. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we're looking at page 10 and 11, Ian. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that particular bit, but and I think that there's some in here about the waste. So we've actually we actually have made some savings. I just wondered if you could detail the savings we've made. And those savings, if I'm right, will be allocated partly for this year and partly for next year.
Yeah, well, thanks. The main saver or the main income is coming from jobs regarding this, which clearly not everybody was in favour of. It's something that we didn't want to introduce, but it's proven that it needed to be done. It's also proven that many of our residents have supported it. At the minute, there's been just shy of £3.75 million brought into the coffers because of that charge for garden waste, and the numbers keep rising. We obviously would like them to be that little bit more, but it does prove that if we hadn't have done that, we would be in a much worse position. Reference the contract negotiations with Veolia. That continues to go on. It will be a slow process. There's a lot in that contract. It's a major contract. It's one of the biggest contracts the council has. It's been ongoing for quite some number of years, and how that materialises, so I have to work out how that will be for future years, not just this year. So there's a lot of work to be done on that.
Okay, thank you. And also, James, it says in here, and sometimes it's a bit misleading. It says 1.750 shortfall on green waste charges, October implementation. I mean, we had a 70% initial take up because we had to divide the figures over the year. So that gives the impression that there was a shortfall, but it was only a shortfall, I think, because of when it was introduced. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Chair. So again, going back to those sort of purple and black tiles for looking at the implications for next year, there's no implication for next year because that will be delivered in the full year effect. But there is an implication for the current year because, yes, the budget had assumed it would be implemented from April, whereas it's actually implemented from in the end, 1st of November. So that's why that split is in.
Right, okay. And the total amount for the year, including the budget, was that 4 million, if I got that right?
4 million.
Yeah. And there's an apportionment. And also there's something in here about the pyrolysis plant and the delay. Could you tell us a little bit about the delay?
Well, wasn't much. The delay happened because of the joint venture, because of the team in the joint venture. There was severe illness, which with the main player, which caused everything to be pushed back slightly. The joint venture is now up and running. It started processing biochar in December, and it's processing more than we initially anticipated. And I think that will, that is showing great signs of producing a good income and good carbon credits. And on top of that, obviously, we have the main project, which is still in the planning process, but it was the joint venture that was slightly delayed, and that was mainly due to a serious illness within the team.
Right, again, so if I just clarify with James, so basically you missed out on 450,000 pounds worth of income because there was a delayed start. But next year, what's the projected income on the pyrolysis plant next year?
We haven't got those figures yet, but as I said, it's what we initially, the initial assessments, we think we will, or there's evidence to show we will produce more than that. So hopefully that can be a regain on that.
Okay, James, have you got any provisional figures for next year?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember what the figures are, no, but my understanding is, again, it's a delay. The full year effect is that there's no implications for next financial year, but I can double check on that, Chair.
Yeah, and of course that does cause us problems when there's delays because there's a bit of hiatus before the money starts to come through. Okay, Leslie, have you got any particular comments to make on Roger's statement around the Place Directorate? Pete, yeah.
No, I mean, the only thing I would say is I would back up what Gwilym has said, really. It's about being flexible enough to actually deal with the highs and lows and the peaks and troughs, of which there will always be those. And picking up on Tom's point, especially in local government, because local government isn't as agile at moving as commercial companies. We can't make those decisions in the same way that commercial companies can. But what I would point out is that, you know, I think it's a little disingenuous of Councillor Evans to talk about the failure of portfolio holders. In my time as a councillor, which admittedly is only 8 years, I've never known portfolio holders more on top of their portfolios in terms of their finances, partly due to the fact that Gwilym has, a large whip, I have to tell him. But he does, and he's made, he has made that point on a number of cases. But I also think it's worth remembering that there are now a significant number of councils across this country who have just gone, can't do this, and we'll ask for emergency funding. We are not one of those councils. We said we would solve these issues ourselves, and we have done so, and we continue to do so. Other councils have literally just chucked in the towel. Maybe that's what future administrations might do, but this administration will not.
Yeah, and can I just say as well, that one of the reasons why I asked Ian to come up and speak to us is because there is a lot of forward thinking going on at the council. The policy, is an example of that. And so we are trying to do everything we can. And also in a particularly green way, because that is the future. Have we got any? Oh, Rosemary.
I wasn't going to bring this up, but since you've
right.
the green, so there's an element of the pyrolysis that is about dealing with our waste in an environmentally friendly way, and there's an element of financial benefit from it, which we're talking about. But there's also an element of continuing and sort of like squaring the whole thing off by recovering the energy that comes from burning the waste. Under those circumstances, and that was kind of not put in the original policy for pyrolysis, but it was meant to be something we move on to. When are we moving on to it?
Well, it's a good point. Like anything where the energy is produced and where it can be used is the issue. We have that issue at Battlefield as well. And the producing energy, but where can it be used locally? How affordable is it to use it locally? So utilising at the joint venture, because that's out, if you haven't had the chance to visit it, it's in the middle of a farm complex, quite rural. But for the proposed project in Ludlow, there may well be prospect because there's an industrial area around it where potentially it could be used. But it's not as easy as just saying we provide that power from point A to put it to point B. It needs to be affordable to be able to do it.
Andrew, what you want to ask a question?
My experience of cost saving in large organisations is that you get large amounts early because they're there to be seen. And then the amount of effort that you have to put in to generate the same amount month on month goes up because you've already taken the easy bits. So the core of the question that is implicit in what Roger was asking and what is actually before us today is how much capacity and capability can you generate in comparison with the task ahead of you in terms of the savings that you have to pull? Because the more you want, the more you have to be clever, adept, have the technical capability. And I'm not positing anything. I'm simply saying there will come a point where no matter how much resource you've got, it's not enough. And the point that Roger was making and that other people are saying is that in the task as you are in it now, and it is desperately difficult, and all credit to the people who are working on it, we're seeing signs in the reports of slippage and of programmes starting late and so on and so forth, which seems to me signs that you're struggling with capability and capacity. And again, not being judgmental about it, it's hard So really what I would be looking for is an assurance that you really do have a high degree of confidence in the capacity of the team, bearing in mind you're cutting people in the organisation, and their technical capability to keep on hitting these numbers. Because there would come a point where, with the best will in the world with anybody, you get to it where you just can't tread on the treadmill fast enough to keep it going. Are you guys confident?
Shall I start?
Well, yes, there you go.
I think you raised quite a valid point, Andrew. And the way I look at it, because I totally endorse what you're saying, and I would hope that we put into place what we've needed to actually address what you're actually saying. It's almost like turning around an oil tanker, this place. And also, because I have human resources within my portfolio, it's unlike a commercial company where you can just go through a straightforward redundancy program, give people on garden leave or whatever you want. We can't. We have to go through the agreed processes, which take months and months and months on occasions, and which is right. We have to look after our staff and everything else. But what we also did at the outset of this program is that we introduced PwC to actually build in that capacity so we could actually do a lot of what you were actually saying. And I know from what PwC has actually cost us, or will cost us by the end of the contract, they will actually have paid back double what they cost us annually in the reduction of revenue by doing exactly what you said, by giving us that capacity to turn the organisation around to be where it needs to be. Now, let's not look at 1 year in isolation here. Last year, we delivered £41 million of savings. This year, we're probably on target to do more than that. Yeah. By the time when we get onto the next paper, Chair, we're actually looking at projected savings for next year of a lot less money, because we will have sorted out the problem. And part of that sorting out the problem and the slippages within the paper we see today is about right-sizing the organisation, I would say. And we're on a cusp of actually achieving that, totally getting out of this building, 1 in 5 staff going, automation, changing the way we do things, and that will lead us into a much more modern, sustainable future for this council. Because the challenges we're going to have next year and the following years, we will look back on this and think, oh my God, how the hell did you do that? That's what I believe. But I would like to hope, and maybe Andy wants to say a few words about right sizing and everything else, that we're on that cusp. We're on the build up to the change, and then we'll see much better things coming forward in the whole process of right sizing.
Andy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, but mate, because I think the comments that have been made so far have been really positive and on the money, actually, in terms of the challenges that we face as an organisation. Because you're absolutely right, as we are reducing the organisation by such a degree, 1 in 5 staff potentially, the kind of reduction in our overall resources, then we are absolutely meeting those challenges head on in terms of not having the capacity, the technical capability, resources to deliver not only the savings, but to continue to deliver some of the essential services. So there's always a prioritisation now going on in terms of where do we apply those resources to best effect. We're at the point now where we'd expect at this point of the financial year, where all the numbers are starting to crystallise a lot more clearly. They become far less of a projection and more of an actual as you get to this point in the financial year. You'll know this, Andrew, completely. What's interesting now, though, just building on what Gwilym said about resizing the organisation and right-sizing, those aren't petty words. One was the necessity around resources. The next point that I want to make is really important, that if you apply the same thinking and the same methodology to deliver services based on the current configuration of this organisation, it won't work. You've got to reconfigure the whole organisation physically and how it delivers services in all sorts of different ways, including the infrastructure internally around those, as much as the point of delivery of those services. We're now shifting to become that organisation. How do we continue then to maintain the trajectory around the current reduction in spend? That remains a challenge because we're in that transition period. But where my eyes are focused on now is not this financial year, though we've got to deliver this clearly. Next year and beyond, it's how do we design, create an organisation fit for the future, but will build in continuous improvement so that actually I don't want us to continue this merry-go-round that we've been on for the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years, 15 years.
Yeah.
This needs to be an organisation that can continually improve and react to external stressors that none of us unfortunately can see at the moment. In my tenure as chief exec, we've had external pressures that we could never have envisaged at the start of one financial year, never mind at the start of 4 years ago. So I think all the points that I've heard today have been really well made. That they are absolutely on the money. Those are the very challenges that we face. As a chief exec, I'm lucky enough not to put a political spin on this. I can just give a straight back response, which I hope I'm trying to do, in that manage within the existing resources, ever reducing resources, but actually have the eye firmly on creating an organisation of the future that can survive and indeed thrive, depending on what the role and function of local authorities are going to be in the next few years, which just to add the complexity, I think that's another set of challenges that will come our way.
Leslie, you wanted to say
Yeah, and I should have made the point before, really, in terms of my colleagues in the Place Directorate of portfolio holders over here, but also in defence of the staff. I think we forget perhaps that, you know, we've been experiencing cuts every single year since about 2012. And you're right, Andrew, it's always easy, isn't it, at the beginning, because there's more to cut away. But I don't know, James, is it about 450 million now has been taken from Shropshire Council's budget since 2012? And I think what, of course, we have to remember is that every year the demand in the People Directorate has increased, which has only left one place to take the money from, and that is from Place. So their budgets are so incredibly tight that, you know, it is now almost, and you heard what Andy said, we can't continue the way we are because it is almost now impossible to take any further money out of that directorate. It might be possible to include some extra income, but to cut it any further is almost impossible.
And traditionally, I'll ask Gwen this question, I think I'm right. Traditionally, you know, we set savings targets, and then usually at the end of it, between Q8 and the year end, we usually make far more pro rata savings at the end of the year than, because everything evens itself out. Is that right? So are you expecting that the savings to come in?
I wouldn't preempt anything.
Oh, right, okay.
However, history has shown us that when we do the final accounts, that the figures become slightly more positive. I cannot guarantee that will happen.
No, but we'll say the last sort of quarter, things tend to sort of fall in. Okay, Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully things will get better. But if one looks at the table on page 2, where it says favourable, central, adverse, even most favourable discussions there show a shortfall of £32 million in this year's budget. It's a central one, which is 37, but at present, even the most favourable one shows a deficit of 32.3. I will come back to the budget papers on page 9, where it says, and I can't understand why this is here, why it was ever here, where it says winter maintenance transfer from reserves. Only 1.397 could not be used. Why was that ever in the budget to be saved if it wasn't possible? However, I will also ask what doesn't appear in these papers, anywhere in the papers for this year, is the report which came to this scrutiny committee 2 meetings ago, I think, about the strip. What's happening about that may be happening elsewhere, but how is the PwC redundancy and the transformation money that it was said we needed the money by the end of March to balance the budget, and it was 15-20 million pound? That doesn't appear in any of these papers. And we need that money to deliver the budget, a balanced budget, by the end of March. How are we paying PwC? How are we paying the transformation? How are we paying the redundancy that was referred to in the paper, which came here 2 meetings ago, saying that that money was needed? Is it going to be raised? Is it possible? I don't know.
Can I just say, Roger, you know, you're part of the collaborative budget process that meets every week. There's been no secrets, everything's been on the table. And you asked that question at the collaborative budget and we gave you the answer. I just asked James if I'm right or not on that one. Yes. And I don't believe that this is the place to be discussing commercially sensitive council information, because we are in a public meeting. So if you'd like to ask James and Leslie and Gwynn after the meeting so that you can recall what they told you at that meeting, I'd be most grateful.
This is a scrutiny meeting, Chairman, where the scrutiny should be able to see any information possible. And I think I would like to know how those discussions are progressing, because they don't appear here to say it's going on. We are now in February, 2 months away from March, when it needs to be there. Is it progressing? As a scrutiny committee, I think the scrutiny committee should hear what is happening, or be told, even in general terms, what is happening about those large sums of money. They're not mentioning any risk that the council has. If one looks at the papers there, and it's this current financial year we are looking at.
Did Gwynn or Leslie or both of you?
Just briefly come in. What we're looking at here is the revenue costs in this financial year. We're not looking at capital receipts, and it's the capital receipt position that actually funds transformation. So it's not actually covered in this paper, Roger. So I would say, briefly, Chair, just stick to the agenda.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Chairman. The request was that it's revenue that pays for that, not capital. We were hoping the capital could be used to pay for that, but it was the revenue side for doing it. And that's why we were asking whether we could use the car parks, etc., to pay for the revenue costs of that. That was my understanding. Am I wrong? And it is all capital.
Can we, I'll get clarification from James. James, if you'd like to explain to Roger why we're not discussing it.
Okay, so it is referred to in the on page 3 of the report, and the adverse, central and favourable scenarios. So item number 4 was capital receipts sufficiency. So no, we don't talk about capital receipts delivery levels within this. Nevertheless, the costs that we have incurred in relation to transformation and redundancy are revenue in nature. So the costs fall, but the funding is something slightly separate. So in a sense, everybody's right in that regard. The total cost of the estimated redundancy costs, we don't know what they are yet, but estimated redundancy cost, estimated PwC cost, estimated transformation costs, including staffing time charged to capital. Total cost could be up to £26.9 million. That's the estimate. If all of that fell on revenue, and there were no capital receipts, and there was no other way of funding that, then the overspend would go up by 26.9. That's not the case, and that's what that scenario is showing on page 2 or page 3, whatever it is, page 3. So what this means is that we do have some capital receipts that are coming through that will pay towards that cost. There were 4 options that have been discussed around what this could look like. One was the income strip model, one was a sale and lease back, one was accelerated capital receipts, and one was capitalisation direction. All of those are provide the opportunity for revenue costs to be funded from capital in one source. Income strip is not being progressed at the moment. That's been discussed several times. That's not being progressed because the underlying position is it won't deliver a capital receipt, it will deliver borrowing, and therefore we still require a capitalisation direction regardless. So it's kind of back to option 4. Option 2 is the sale and lease back. That's still being progressed, but again, this is the bit where we don't want to discuss that in public in terms of what that may mean. The third option is accelerated capital receipts. We can discuss that briefly in the sense that we're looking to deliver capital receipts in before the end of the year. There is a question mark though in terms of is it all about delivering capital receipts and therefore not necessarily getting best consideration for the value of the land or the property, or is it better to bring in a capital receipt at the best possible level, which may mean that we don't hit that notional 31st of March deadline. That has an impact in terms of the budget, but it also has a different impact in terms of the cash position, and also obviously if we take a reduced receipt because we want it more quickly, that's not necessarily best value. And so then the fourth option is capitalisation direction, which is simply saying that we can use other funds for the purposes of capital. So that includes borrowing. So those are the options that have been taken forward. That has been discussed at length at the collaborative budget meeting. I don't think there's anything there that anybody that's been party to the collaborative budget would not understand or would not be fully aware of, but the benefit to the other scrutiny members, hopefully that provides some update on the position.
Okay, so I think it's about time we moved on now. We've given everybody lots of opportunity to ask questions. I'm really sorry, Ben, we haven't spoken to you yet.
He's not sorry.
No. So
Please don't worry, Chair.
on you in a minute. So what I propose is that we actually note this report. I think that's probably the best thing to do. So I shall propose it. Can I have a second, please? Roger.
I don't think we should just note it. I think we should at the very least note with concern where we are, not just note it. We are a scrutiny committee. We should be scrutinising period 8. And if one looks at there, it says to note period 8 position and the savings there, and then to note the projected general fund balance of £1.510 million arising if no further action. We know concern that the level of the general fund balance is that low. And if we don't mention that as a concern, I don't think we are doing our job as a scrutiny committee at the very least. Hopefully I'll have a seconder.
Second.
Okay, so Roger's made a proposal and it's proposed and seconded. We'll take that first. All those in favour of Roger's proposal? 1, 2, 3, 4. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's fallen. So we go back to my original proposal, where I think we should actually note the monitoring period 8. I proposed it, Tom seconded it. All those in favour? Thank you. That's right, thank you very much. So moving on to item number 7 is the draft financial strategy from 25-26 to 28-29. Get James to introduce it, and then I think I ought to get Ben to say a few words. So he's not the frontist yet. And Leslie and Ian, you're more than welcome to come back to the front if there's any particular things you want to say on this. Thank you. Right, there you go, James.
Thank you, Chair. So quite a lot of information has come through since the last financial strategy report was taken through to cabinet, which was before Christmas. We received the settlement, and then over the Christmas period into the new year, we've been working through what the implications of the settlement are and what that means for the financial position overall. So probably the easiest way to talk about it is to go to the first table, which is on page 2, which shows a breakdown of the overarching figures. So the overall gap in terms of the MTFS for the next financial year, for 25-26, is showing at 22.777, so £22.8 million. And that is made up of 3 particular areas. First area is £3.769 million. This is the value of the savings that were identified and taken to council in February of last year, which related to the 25-26 financial year. So as an example, there could have been a £1 million saving in 24-25, and then on top of that, another £500,000 saving in 25-26 from the same initiative. So this is those extra bits on top and other things that were perhaps being consulted on in 24-25, but could never be delivered until 25-26. So the 7.769 was identified as part of that. The next figure is 8.029. I'll come back to that in a second. The other part that we looked at in terms of the overall financial position of the council, we in October identified growth that needed to go into, in particular, adults and children's social care. That growth was estimated based on the current position for the current year, extrapolated forward into the next financial year. So it was assumed, X number of children in care. What was the growth in the current year? What would that mean growth in terms of the next financial year? What was then done was to work through the modelling of that in more detail and identify whether mitigations could be put in place to reduce some of that growth. In total, those mitigations come to the 10.979 million that's identified there. So these are mitigations against growth. So it's not a saving in a sense, it's just not as much going in as was originally identified. The figure in the middle, the 8.029, this was the resulting balance when we took the overall gap in the financial strategy, took off the demand management mitigations, and took off the previous savings that had been agreed. Just to be clear, that 3.769, I should have said this earlier, 3.769 million from last year, what was taken to council was around about £12 million. But over this financial year, reports have been taken through to cabinet in July and in October that said these bits are no longer deliverable, these bits have been taken out. So that's where that £12 million was reduced down. So in terms of next year, the position is 22.8 million. That's the size of the problem that we're facing. But in terms of the headline is 8.029, because that's the figure, that's the actual gap that has not yet been resolved. There aren't things in place to be able to manage that. I'll explain what we're doing for that in a second. On top of that, as was talked about in the previous report, and those purple and black and white tiles, the implications of the 90 million for the current financial year. What does that mean in terms of non-delivery for next year? Well, the next part down in that table shows a figure of 37.705 million. That, as at period 8 at the end of November, was the undelivered savings for the current year that would roll into 25-26. So if you take all of that in its entirety, it comes to 60.482 million, 60.5 million pounds to round. So that's the size of the issue. To address that 60.5, well, we've still got another couple of months to eat into that 37.7. So the current year, we know what those are. There's just more delivery that needs to be worked through on that. And we need to reduce that figure as far as possible. In terms of the other areas, 22.8 million is significantly less than the 62.5 and the 51.4 that were the savings targets for the previous financial year. Move down the report and just go into section 7, because I think it's helpful just to talk about why we are in the position that we are in. So when we received the settlement, what that demonstrated was that across the country, more funding was going into local authorities. 68.9 billion in total is the core spending power for the entire country. That's higher than the previous year, but it includes, let's not forget, 38.3, so more than 50% of that is funded through council. So a lot of that money that goes into local authority coming from the local taxpayer. 7.2 says that in Shropshire, our core spending power was £10.4 million more than the previous year. That's really helpful, an extra £10 million, great. However, that increase was only 3.1%. Now, I say only 3.1% for two reasons. Firstly, because it was the third lowest increase of any local authority in the country, like authority in the country, I should say. So of 186 authorities, there were only 2 authorities that got a lower settlement than we did. Some were seeing increases in their core spending power of north of 9%. So we got 3.1. So that's one reason why I would say it's only 3.1. The second reason I'd say it's only 3.1 is, don't forget, we're assuming, and the government, in assuming that our increase was 3.1, is a council tax increase of 4.99%. So it's not hard to do the maths. If we're putting up the council tax by 4.99%, and yet our overall increase is only 3.1%, something's happening to impact on that increase within Shropshire. 7.3 says core spending power is £12.3 million more than we previously assumed. Again, that sounds really good, but let's just not forget, back in October, we thought we'd got a £37 million gap for next year. So 12.3 million off 37 leaves you 25. Actually, the final figures come out of 22.8, which I talked about before. So we've still got a gap, even though there was more than was assumed. It's just not as big a gap as we thought perhaps in October. If we go down to section 7.5, there's a few points within there that are just worth drawing out. So if you remember that figure of 22.8 million, which is the size of our gap, when the new funding formula has been, the new funding formula has been introduced for through the provisional settlement, what that did was a couple of things. One was that the core spending power floor, FLOOR floor, was removed. There was a floor in the formula previously that said no local authority will have an uplift of less than 4%. There's only 3 authorities that have now got an uplift of less than 4%, Os, Herefordshire and Rutland. And if that floor had been retained, we would have seen an extra £3 million coming through. As it is, we're not seeing that £3 million based on the provisional settlement. So just by removing that floor, we're £3 million worse off, and that only applies to 3 authorities in the country. Rural Service Delivery Grant has been trailed a few times. There's only about 14 authorities across the country that receive more than £1 million of core spending power. It only costs actually just over £100 million nationally to allocate core revenue Rural Service Delivery Grant. The value in Shropshire was £9 million last year. That's been removed and taken out of the formula. So for the sake of saving £100 million, for the sake of saving £100 million nationally, which is less than a rounding error, Shropshire has been hit by £9 million reduction. The third part I want to pick up on is actually covered in section 7.8, and this is the way that the funding has been allocated around social care. Normally, we would expect to see between 0.6 and 0.8% of the social care pot coming to Shropshire. We've actually seen less than that. In fact, the figure is somewhere between 12 and £20 million. We've seen a reduction depending on how you do the calculation. But if you take a broad figure of around about £16 million loss through social care, you add the £9 million with loss through Rural Services Grant, and you add the £3 million with loss through removal of the floor, then you get to £28 million, which is very close to the £22.8 million. In fact, it's simply more. It's close to the £22.8 million we've had to find savings for this year. So had those few things not been changed, we would actually be looking at a budget for 25-26, where our only concern would be to deliver the tail of the savings from the current financial year into next year. And to be fair, if you think back a few years now, we talked about having a big delivery of savings in one or stretched out to 2 years. But then after that, our financial strategy looked reasonably balanced. We talk about single figure changes in terms of the gap. This has introduced a gap of £22.8 million, which means that we've now got those additional savings that need to be delivered. So the tables lower in the report just take you through the makeup of the resources that make up the funding position, and the makeup of the expenditure, which demonstrates how much we're looking to spend over the year, and then the gap between those two. The gap between those two, the official figure is the 8.029, because, as I say, the 3.6 was already agreed from the previous year, and then the other is a demand mitigation on the expenditure. It's not actually a funding gap that's in place. We're currently out to consultation on a set of savings. Those savings in their entirety come to just short of £8.5 million. So if we implemented pretty much all of those £8.5 million with the savings, that would enable us to close that 8.029 gap. We deliver the 3.769 agreed by council last year, and we deliver the mitigation. We would only be left then with a carry forward from the current year in terms of savings to be delivered. I think the important thing is to think about, going back to that table back on page 2, is there are basically those 4 areas that we need to focus on. Previous years, the MTFS delivered agreed last year, the savings for this year, and the demand mitigation. They're the 4 blocks that make up the budget for this year. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any questions? Okay. Okay. I'll let Andrew ask first then, because Roger's usually first.
Sorry to express this concern again, but I'm going to. It strikes me that progress towards making savings has been difficult. We've got a current gap of a saving of 37.7 million from this year that we're attacking. Is that my understanding? Is that correct? And that next year, it would appear that the government funding has resolutely shut the door on relief from having to keep doing that, in that you now have a further 20 million to fund. And this is bearing in mind the cuts in terms of redundancy actually being already factored into your NTFS. Is that correct? So the savings, for example, in the compulsory redundancy programme. So really what this tells us is that, having made the cuts that are deemed necessary, we're going to have to go and find some more cuts. So it's the same question, just put forward another year. Is it there to be had? And can you deliver it?
Well, I think perhaps I ought to look to my left a little bit, and hopefully we can lobby some of our MPs to get us a better funding.
Well, I'm sure that's already been done.
Yeah, well, I think we need to do it again, yeah.
That's the third point to make, in that one of the significant problems is the third lowest funding in the country, which seems like a slap in the chops to me.
And yes, and I don't think I think it's reflected across the rural areas where obviously they've attracted the lowest funding. Sorry, Ben, yes, you'd like to come back and answer that question?
If I may, Chair, I think it's I think I know that James and I have been doing a kind of double-headed approach to this, and one of us will take some of the detail and the other will take a little bit of the overview. And James has just walked you through the detail of the paper, absolutely. And I just wanted to make sure that the committee understood some of the broader kind of overview around this. So if I may, Chair, just briefly, I think that the position that we need to understand is that unlike in some previous settlements over the last 10, 20 years, where actually we've seen government taking a view which seems to relate to the idea that basically local government is too big. Actually, this is a settlement which in some respects, in some councils, is actually really well received. There are councils, Liverpool, Manchester, Blackpool and others, as James said, that are receiving 9% in core spending power growth. So it's really, really substantial growth in some areas. And part of that is because they're receiving a slice of the grant called Recovery Grant, which is a new grant that's been created. We're right down at the bottom. It's no accident that we're right down at the bottom with other rural authorities. I think, Chair, as you mentioned, it's that rurality is a really important aspect of this. But I think what the committee, or what I don't want the committee to lose sight of, if I can put it this way, this is the first part of the first act of a 3-act play. So the first act is the 25-26 settlement. So we've had the provisional settlement. We're going through the consultation process. The first act closes with the publication of the final settlement, which will probably be in about 3-4 weeks' time, something like that. So there can be some change, and there often has been change on the back of lobbying by MPs, by councillors, representation being made to government to say, wait a minute, what about? And a key aspect of that in our in respect to what's happening for us, I think, is James talked about the removal of the 4% floor. If the 4% floor was reinstated, it will cost government the incredible sum of 11.5 million. That's in the context of English councils' core spending power being 68.9 billion. So it would cost government next to nothing. Exactly as James said earlier, it's roundings. So it wouldn't be difficult to put back that 4% funding floor, at which point we stand to benefit to the tune of about 3.5 million. The next part of the lobbying, I think, is around rural services delivery grant. And as James says, we've lost 9 million. Now, there's something curious about the process there. That was announced as being withdrawn as part of the local government funding policy statement published by government on the 28th of November. It was confirmed as having been withdrawn as part of the provisional settlement on the 18th of December. There is no consultation question around whether or not we agree with the removal of the rural services delivery grant. And the group of rural councils called the Rural Services Network have raised an important challenge, I think, to government in their response, which is along the lines of, we're not actually sure government properly followed its own process here. We are concerned that they've simply removed 110 million of grant, which only impacts on particular authorities without properly consulting, and maybe not without properly considering the impact. I certainly haven't seen any impact assessment. So what we're seeing is that middle part of the first act. We will close with the finalisation of the settlement for next year, and hopefully we'll see an improved position for the council, but we don't know, we'll see. The middle act is going to be, the second act of this 3-act play will be a consultation around the future funding of local government, not just for 25-26, because that will have gone, but actually for 26-27 and all of the years out to the end of the life of the Parliament, around about 2029-30. This is the, it's a bit like a unicorn. You always think you've seen it and then it disappears again. So the fairer funding review, the fair funding review or the needs and resources review, it's gone by a number of different names. That's going to come back and is going to run alongside the settlement in central government. What we will see is that there'll be a lot of consultation around that. That will be concluded probably September time-ish. We will then see, and this will be the third act of this 3-act play, we will see a settlement in the coming year for 26-27. So in 12 months' time, we'll go through this again. And there'll probably be a meeting like this again. The difficulty is that if we're not careful, some of the things that have been removed, very much to the detriment of Shropshire Council and other similar rural councils, that will then be baked in for the next 3 to 4 years. And it will be almost impossible to change the position. So what we're arguing here is that this is the first part of a longer term engagement with government, and part of the challenge, and it's a difficult challenge, is that we need to seek to persuade government that actually there are differences in the nature of providing services in a large council area. And to put some sort of numbers around that, some of the numbers are included in some of the attachment to the report you're currently considering. It's things like Shropshire as an area covers 1,200 square miles. That's our council area. The 33 London boroughs combined cover 600 miles. Shropshire covers twice the area of all 33 London boroughs combined, and yet the Rural Services Delivery Grant has been removed. It would appear with no consultation. There is something about whether or not this is fair. And what we are seeking to raise here is a little bit of an alarm bell, which is we have to try to tackle this across officers and members, because if we can't, the future starts to look very bleak because it will just be repeating itself. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much, James. That was very helpful.
Ben.
Oh, sorry, Ben. Sorry. I know.
It's been a long day.
It has been a long day. Yes, we've been doing this since 9 o'clock this morning. Roger.
Right. Thank you, Chairman. I echo all that was just said, and I think we're all joining together with all the MPs lobbying government about the unfairness of what's being proposed. And yet it is totally unfair on authorities like us what is being proposed. No consultation. So we're on, I think everybody is on the same page for that. However, on this paper here before us, forgive me if I've misread it, but if one looks at the chart on, or the table on page 11, and then the table on page 9, one is the resources, one is the original gross budget requirements. There's a £63 million difference between the two. Is that £63 million reflected in the table on page 2, which shows the total of all saving plans being delivered in 25-26? Is that the same? And also the £37.7 million there, which we looked at in the previous report, some of that is not deliverable. So where is that going to appear elsewhere, bringing everything together for it? Because I went through some of the comments that were in the previous report where it says it's not deliverable, including the winter savings of 1.4 million, I think, which it says it isn't possible to use. So is that money there the same as the difference between these two, or is that too simplistic?
Yeah, you go, James.
Okay. So, you're absolutely correct. In terms of the resources, which are shown on page 9, that shows the makeup of all of the resources that we have. And for 25-26 comes to 751 million. And then the expenditure, which is shown on page 11, shows 814 million pounds spent. You're absolutely correct. The difference between those two is 62 million. If you go back up to page 8, that's then shown in the table there under section 7.17. So the 751 and the 814 gives a gap of 62.9. What we then have is those one-off grants that we receive to the tune of 54.9 million, which is shown there, which brings the gap down to the 8.029 that I mentioned earlier. The reason we do that is because it just makes it clear that actually we do have a 62 million pounds funding gap if the government decided to change some of that one-off funding. So some of those one-off fundings, we are constantly, and we've said this all the way along, it is not, you've got an RSG, which is built in, Revenue Services, Revenue Support Grant, which is built in, but improved social care funding, improved ed care funding, I should say, is only ever a one-year allocation. And so every authority in the country assumes that that's going to continue to go on. But the reality is it's only ever assumed 1 year at a time. It's never actually allocated into those several years. It could be as part of the settlement. They may say multi-year settlement, right, we're now guaranteeing these figures for the next 3 years, in which case we can build it in for our resources assumptions rather than it being a one-off. In terms of the 37.7 carry forward, yes, that is included within those figures already. So the thing to remember is, if you look at that expenditure line, which says we will spend £814 million, that is £814 million expenditure, assuming that the 51.4 from last year, the 62.5 from the current year, have been taken out of that expenditure. So the problem doesn't lie with the budget. The 37.7 will show itself by us spending more than the budget allows. So the budget has been taken. That budget was taken, say some of it was taken last year, some of it has been taken this year. So that expenditure figure already assumes that's going to happen. The reason we highlight 37.7 is because it's not a budget problem. It's saying that unless we then take out those additional costs, we will overspend against that position. So I hope that explains that situation.
Okay, thank you. Good.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to answer Andrew's point. I think it was a valid point around the constant ongoing of having to find more and more savings year upon year upon year. I'd like to remind members that we bring the midterm financial strategy forward on a quarterly basis now. And although on this one, we're predicting, I think it's 22 million, is it, if I'm correct? If the table. Yeah, 22.7. Obviously, when we started that, I think in June and in September last year, the figure was substantially higher until officers actually got to the nuts and bolts and the mitigation of what we're actually going to deliver. And this is part of the ongoing problem that both the directors in people and in place and in resources, let alone doing the J job, they're constantly, let alone sorting out the budget for this year, they're having to try and predict what's going to happen next year and the following year. And that is all about around the data analysis, how many people are getting older, what premises we're going to need and everything else. And like I always say, when we bring this budget forward in February, this is our vision, our plan. It will never happen exactly like this because there is so many things that can change as we go through the year. And that's why we have the reserves. But it's a valid point. And I was really pleased when this paper came out that, irrespective of the government grant to a certain extent, that demand management mitigations included in the budget proposal, senior officers had already come up with £11 million of the problem for next year, which is really good. We've got the carry forward totals there of 3.7, and we've only had to go out to the public on £8 million this year. You remember 2 years ago, we went out on 51 million. Bit of a difference, I would say. But yeah, valid points. And it will be ongoing, Andrew. When we get back, whoever's doing my role in June, they will be coming to you saying, well, next year we've got a demand problem of this. How are we going to solve it? And then within those few months, we will try and bring it down again. They're coming up with those results. But thank you.
Andrew.
Yeah, I'm looking at page 2, and my personal experience in being hundreds upon hundreds of budget meetings is that working very hard about a structural problem, but you've still got a structural problem. In that, currently, you're undershooting, forecast to undershoot this year's savings by 37.7 billion, and there's a further 22 for next year that you've seen, but you've thought about and you've actually in on the case. So the total headwinds you got here are £60 million, 37 plus 22 plus the. Okay, so when it comes to next year's budget, it seems that maybe the 22 million isn't going to be your significant problem. It's this year's 37 that's going to be your significant problem.
If I could just come back on that, if I may, Chair.
Yep.
To a certain extent, I have a tendency to agree with you, and I think what the chief executive was saying about right sizing, and we're on that cusp of hopefully that, in my eyes, that 37 million is being a little bit backlogged because around redundancies, around buildings, around moving to Guildhall, and it's that crescendo of getting everything in the right place, the IT sorted, customer services sorted, everything else, and you'll see a huge shift. Next year, and hopefully because we'll have got the council into the right place it needs to be, it'll all be around demand mitigation and how do we stop the demand coming in the first place. That's my personal opinion. So this year, yes, we're coming to the end of that, changing the size and how we do things, but in the future it'll be around demand and the amount of outcomes we need for our residents. But that's how I see it.
It just strikes me that this is the last charge over the top of the trench, as it were, and maybe you'll take the opposing lines and maybe you won't. And again, I'm not being pejorative about it. It's just, this is the final nitty gritty. And these numbers, in comparison to your 1.5 million reserves that were forecasted to be at the year end, are quite eye-wateringly large.
But do be aware that part of the budgetary process is we will include putting a huge amount back into reserves on the 1st of April. So you will have some contingency space again to help you in case there's further slippages, as there will be into the following years.
Roger, did you want to ask a question?
Not really, Chairman, on this because in a way, this is the draft financial strategy.
Yeah.
Which we are going to report to, or it's asked for us to report to Scrutiny on February the 12th. Somewhere around there.
Yeah, cabinet. Yeah.
We're still waiting for the final settlement, so we don't know what the final figures are. So, and as I say, I support everything about getting that financial settlement figure when we get it improved, bringing it up to so the extra money's there, and to be fair to us as to all the other authorities. But we have very little indication in this as a scrutiny report, as a scrutiny committee, what the £22.777 million gap is. How will that be addressed? There's the 8.02, which has been consulted. We don't know what the result of that consultation is, and I know the timescales. But as I say, the money that is there, we don't know what is being recommended. So we're being asked to say we'll agree and make that 22.7. What does it mean? I don't know.
I don't.
But that's what this scrutiny committee is being asked to do.
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Leslie?
No, only in the respect that, we've said that Roger is aware that there is 8 million point something of savings to be made in there, which we've consulted upon. And then there's some mitigation money as well within the social care. Now, we know that the officers have given that, as Willem said, have given it some serious thought, and they came forward with that figure themselves. So the mitigation plus those current savings come to that 22 million. I don't know what else there is to say. I don't know if I could just say one other thing, Chair, because as Roger quite rightly said, we have put forward a very robust defence back to government on the financial settlement. But I do think we need to be, and picking up on Andrew's point, I do think we need to be really clear that the government does not like rural councils. And it certainly doesn't like rural councils, unitary councils. If you talk to my counterpart in Hereford at the moment, they are in an unbelievably difficult position.
As is Worcestershire.
As is Staffordshire. Although Worcestershire and Staffordshire, of course, are two-tier. However, there does feel to me that there is a little bit of an agenda going on here. And I think that agenda we should all be very cognizant of, because I firmly believe that agenda is around making unitary councils much bigger. And I'm not saying that this is a carrot. I think it's a stick. I think this is a stick that the government are beating rural authorities with. If you look at the list of rural authorities, or if you look at the list of authorities, Ben, if you haven't seen it, I well recommend it. Not that you'll be able to read it on screen, but Ben has a very good graph which shows all of the councils and all of the settlement that they receive. It is no surprise that the very worst ones are the rural authorities. I mean, you sort of expect Rutland, because Rutland, forgive me, leader of Rutland, but they're very, very tiny. But you are looking at seriously rural councils. And I think Cecilia is still with us, actually, but she's just come off of a Rural Services Network call. If you haven't seen the Rural Services Network response, I urge you to read it because it is extremely good. But it's very, very clear that the Labour government does not recognise funding problems in a rural area. They just don't see the additional costs. What they see, I think in somebody's words, was Range Rovers and leafy green. And roses round the door. We have serious pockets of deprivation in this county, just like everywhere else, but we also have a very, very high cost of delivering services across a sparsely populated county. I don't think we should be under any illusions as to what the government agenda is.
Right, so Ben, can you follow that?
I'm feeling suddenly very shy.
Yeah, I thought so, yeah.
No, sorry, I just a very, I think, yeah, completely understand the points that are being made, not seeking to follow at all. Just in terms of the values in table 1 that's been discussed a little, I think just for clarity, it's worth sharing with the committee the 3769 savings included for the new financial year that were also included in the current year budget. That figure has come down because we've gone through a process of reviewing them and taking out any which we no longer believe to be achievable, or which now seem to be achievable but at a lower level. So that's had a level of scrutiny and due diligence applied to it. The new proposals, ditto, as has been said. The demand management mitigations, for clarity on that, these are areas where in many cases there are things which happen, for example, around income, which happen in parallel to things which happen around cost. So, for example, for adult social care, client contributions come in. We know this, but that means that as adult social care activity goes up, as demand goes up, we also find an increase in the income as well. So what we've done there is to include through, so in terms of demand management mitigations, it is helping us to mitigate the demand or the cost of the demand as it comes through, but it's doing it in a way which we understand. These aren't kind of hypothetical numbers, they're evidence-based numbers. And again, officers have been through that as needed. And lastly, on the 37.7, I think we need to be clear there that actually there are extensive plans in place associated with those. The difficulty with it is that they haven't been able to be delivered at the pace which was originally anticipated. So there are clear plans in place to that value, and we're working through exactly how all of those different 4 lines come together. So we've got an understanding of it. I don't want the committee to lose sight of the idea that actually there's been an awful lot of scrutiny, not formal scrutiny through members, but consideration by officers about what's actually deliverable based on the emerging position as we've understood it through the current financial year. I hope that gives some clarity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right then, so we've got some recommendations here. I think it's on page. It is here on page 3. Yeah. To note the revised estimates and also to note the uncertainty affecting estimates from 26-27 and the period 26 to 30. I think that's probably a fair reflection of the debate we've had this afternoon. Rosemary.
Yeah, just a question about 3.2.
Yeah.
We've had considerable amounts of discussion in another setting.
Yeah.
About the robustness of the council's response to the settlement, the first part of the settlement. And I just wonder, we talked at length about making a graphic explanation, a clear, that everyone could see of what our situation is in terms of delivery as robust as possible response, first of all, to the consultation, which I've seen, which is all verbal. And I just wonder where are those graphic representations that we talked about at great length, and when will those be delivered to government?
Right, yeah, because Tom's just shown me one now. Very good question. Tom, who's in charge of doing that? Ben, sorry, Ben, you got your hand up again.
No, it's fine. Just very quickly, Rosemary, to your point, in the paper from page 15 and also in page 16, there are some graphics that have been included there. The way in which the format in which the consultation was required to be submitted didn't allow us to include pictures or charts or anything. Therefore, a letter is being put together. I'd love to say my team are working on it as we speak. Actually, I'm working on it and into the gaps in some of the conversation. So there is a letter being drafted on Leslie's behalf, which will include the types of graphics that have been already shared, but also some further graphics that have been prepared by colleagues in comms. So that will be submitted to government. It's just it wasn't possible to submit it in the way which we'd hoped it would be able to be submitted alongside the consultation. I hope that clarifies.
Could I just
come back in on that?
I'm sorry. Could I just quickly comment?
Yeah.
From history, I am aware that they will be looking at our council papers anyway. So they will see everything that, and we will have probably as many graphics as we've got now, if not more, for the council paper in February.
I just wonder when will we put this into government?
Yes, I don't know. Leslie will tell you that. Do you want the 3.2 recommendation? Do you want to add anything to that then about graphs or anything in there?
I'm just going to find it.
Leader, do you know when you'll send me the letter?
Well, the consultation has already gone back in, so I'll send the letter as soon as it's ready.
Okay, so you will send the letter.
Yeah, we're doing the same to the county council network as well.
Okay.
So Claire,
yeah,
if we could say that in recommendation 2, that would be good.
Yeah. Okay. So we want okay. So what wording would want? Better graphic representations of the situation, or something like that. Yeah. So if we have all those 3 in, is everyone happy with that? I'll propose that. Got a seconder? Tom, everyone? Yep. I think that's pretty much unanimous. That's good. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Ben. Right, so I think now we're just going to have a quick look at the work programme. We've got another meeting on the 11th, which is the day before Cabinet, when we will have the, so we'll know the final financial settlement the week before that meeting. So we'll be able to discuss that, okay? So, yeah, can you, Tom? I think you've got it covered.
Yeah,
anyway.
so
yes.
just to say, I think on the 11th, the reason you end up with 2 meetings so close together after Christmas is this meeting always in the previous week or this week, so that you have an opportunity to look at what's happening in terms of the financial strategy and budget as it's coming forward. Ideally, you'd have them at the same time, but the second meeting has to be in place because you take the Q3 performance and Q3 finance reports to that meeting. And as Claire's just sort of said there, the planners at the moment, I think it's the final medium-term financial strategy document to come through this committee before it goes on to Cabinet on the 12th. But it's just that continuous flow through.
Okay, so have you got any comments about that? I mean, I don't think we can do anything other than what we're doing. Everyone content? Yes. Right, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for coming today. Thank you to those who joined remotely. I think we can go offline now.